In this video, we take a look at the Arnold IPR window or the interactive preview render window. You can access the IPR window from the Arnold menu. I have it docked in the UI. Let's start the IPR. The Arnold IPR window is designed to give real-time feedback of changes made in the scene, and it will automatically update the render every time it detects a change in the scene. Let's start with the toolbar first. You can use the play button to start and stop the interactive renderer. This pause button stops updating the scene until it is released and collects all changes in the background. It's useful to save time between multiple changes when the scene export takes too much. So let's enable this pause button. Maybe change this orange material to a pink color. And now if we release the pause button, we see the changes. Okay. Scale here defines the resolution of the interactive render based on the final resolution. Right now, the final resolution in the render settings is 900s by 1200s. And if I set the scale to 100% in the IPR, that final resolution will be used. If set to 50%, the final resolution will be halved, and if set to 200%, the interactive render will be twice as big as the defined final resolution. For now, let's set it to 70% of the final resolution. If you want a custom resolution for your IPR independent from the final resolution, go to the View menu, Toolbar, Show Resolution, and change the type from scale to width and height. And now you have a width and height parameter, and you can type in your desired resolution for the IPR. In most cases, you probably want it to be a simple scale value. Zoom allows you to zoom in and out of the rendered image without changing the resolution. This channel combo box lets you see specific R, G, and B channels. This camera box lists all the cameras in the scene and lets you choose between them. In this scene, we only have one camera that is simply called camera. We can select it here. Now I can get out of that camera in the viewport and move around the scene, but IPR still uses that defined camera to render with regardless of my viewport view. Now this list has two special options, active camera and default camera. Active camera always reflects the camera selected in the viewport. The next option is default camera. Let me look through the main camera in the viewport. Default camera uses the default C4D camera, basically your perspective cinema 4D camera. For now, I'm going to choose the active camera. This display list lets you select the AOV to be shown in the IPR, and these AOVs need to be defined in the render settings. By default, you have your beauty pass or your final render basically, and the alpha AOV. I can go to render settings and under AOVs, let's add diffuse, specular, and SSS. Now in the IPR, we should get diffuse, specular, and SSS AOVs as well. If you want to temporarily check an AOV without committing to it, you can use this inactive list, which lets you choose an inactive AOV. Let's choose the indirect AOV, for example. Now we are looking at the indirect pass, but it hasn't been added to the list. And if I go back to the beauty pass again, I lose that pass. So to temporarily check an AOV, you can do it this way. Let's check the motion vector pass as well. Cool, let's get back to the beauty pass. On the right hand of the IPR window, we have these display filter and pixel information panels. Let's open up the display filter panel. Display filter gives you some basic color correction options that are applied only in the IPR, so they won't be saved out with your final render. It's very useful and I tend to use it on a regular basis. You can adjust saturation, brightness, contrast, exposure, gamma of your render, or enable color lookup and load a lookup table or a LUT file. Basically, you can enable or display filter from the panel or right from the top toolbar using this icon in the toolbar. Pixel information panel gives you color information of the pixel under the mouse pointer. Let's close this panel as well. Debug shading button enables or disables debug shading mode. If you right click on it, you can choose a specific shading mode like diffuse lighting, normal, object, wireframe, and so on. Next, we have isolate selected mode, which allows you to isolate specific shaders, lights, or objects. First of all, make sure we don't have anything selected in the object or material manager. Now enable the isolate selected mode. Let's say I just want to render the blades geometry. I can select that group in the object manager. And now that is the only thing that is being rendered in the IPR. Deselect everything again. The same thing goes for your lights. If you select any light while this mode is on, only that light will be used and the rest of the lights will be turned off. Right now we are using an Arnold sky with an HDRI lighting. Let's add a physical sky. Now we have two light sources in the scene. If I select the physical sky, the HDRI lighting will be ignored, and if I select the HDRI lighting, the physical sky will be ignored. You can quickly see how useful this isolation mode can be for look dev. Let me delete the physical sky. And the same thing is true for the shaders. If I deselect everything and select this white plastic shader, for example, only the geometries with that shader will be rendered. If I open up that shader, let's add a noise node. And set its scale to 50. I'm going to use it as the specular roughness, for example. Now, if I select the standard shader, I will see that in the IPR. And if I select the noise node without setting it as the beauty shader, that specific node will be isolated in the render. An incredibly robust and useful tool. If you right click on the isolate selected icon, you can lock your current selection. And now if you select anything else, still that locked selection will be used. Let's disable the isolation mode. Using render region tool, you can marquee select an area within the IPR window that you wish to be rendered, and this way you can focus on a specific part of your render. And the shortcut is shift and drag. You can enable and disable motion blur in the IPR. We talk about this auto TX generation button later on, as there might be some changes to TX workflow in the new small release of Arnold. From the view menu, toolbar menu, enable show color space list. Color space combo box is visible in the toolbar, listing the available color spaces based on the active color manager. Right now we are using ACES as our color manager, and these color spaces come with ACES. We can output for Rec 709, for example, or P3DCI. Let's use sRGB for now, and let me hide the color space list as it takes up a lot of space. This reload texture button flushes the texture cache and restarts the IPR. This camera icon takes a snapshot from the current image in the IPR and sends it to the picture viewer. So let's take a snapshot. When you take a snapshot, you notice it has a specific naming convention. A snapshot with 3-digit padding and the sample count. To control and customize this naming convention, you can go to the render menu and choose snapshot settings. And in this name field, you can add specific information to the naming convention using these tokens here. For example, let's say I want to add the focal length information of my camera to the naming. So simply add a space to the end, and from the token list, add focal length and press OK. Now, if I take another snapshot, it will also contain the lens information, which is 50 millimeters. And you can customize the naming besides the tokens. Like it would be nice for anyone to know what this 50 is. So we can type in lens, space, colon, and after the token, let's add a space and type in for millimeters. And press OK. Now, if you take another snapshot, it will contain that customization. It says a 50 millimeter lens was used. You can also add a text overlay to the snapshot. Let's enable it. You can add the same tokens, but you have 3 lines to add them. By default, we have the scene name, the active AOV, sample counts, memory usage, frame number, date, and time of the render. Let's press OK and take another snapshot. And now that information is overlaid on top of the snapshot. If I go back to the snapshot settings window, you can customize the overlay by changing the font size and color, background color, and so on. For now, let me disable text overlay and press OK. Now let's take a look at the menu bar. In the view menu, we have show pixel information, which if enabled displays the coordinates and color of the pixel under the mouse pointer in the status bar down here. From the toolbar submenu, you can choose which tools will show up in the toolbar. You can enable only the tools that you need the most and customize the toolbar to your liking. From the sidebar menu, you can make the display filter and pixel information panels visible. Fit to window updates the zoom to fit the image to the window. Let's draw a render region right now. Fit to render region moves the render region to the center and updates the zoom to fit to the window. Now if we zoom way in, we can use the center render region to center the render region to the view. In the render menu, we have render with AOVs. When enabled, all AOVs are rendered at once, which means the IPR does not restart when you change the displayed AOV from the display list. You have access to the debug shading mode here as well. We talked about snapshot settings. We have this copy region to render settings. When you enable render region in the IPR and click on copy region to render settings, then the region is set as the render region in the render settings window as well. If I open up the render settings and go to the output tab and open up the render region section and enable render region, now we can click on copy region to render settings. And now if we render to the picture viewer, only that specified region in the IPR will be rendered in the picture viewer as well. Let me disable the render region in the render settings and in the IPR. Clear bitmap option under the render menu clears the IPR. Render to viewport renders the image in the viewport instead of the IPR. For now, let me disable this progressive render option. We'll get back to it in a moment. In the render settings under the system tab, we have this IPR section. If I run the IPR, you can see we have this progressive refinement. The image is rendered several times, and each time the camera samples will increase to give us a cleaner result. And after that, basically, the final render will start. If I stop the IPR and clear the image and disable the progressive refinement and run the IPR, Now the final render immediately starts, so the IPR will render the scene like picture viewer, which is not a good idea, and it is the opposite of what IPR is for. We need that fast initial response when making a change in the scene, and disabling progressive refinement would defeat the purpose. Let's enable it again. We have this initial sampling level, which is the initial camera samples used for the first progressive render in the IPR. So the more you decrease this value, the faster the initial response would be, but it would be also blockier. So if I set it to say something like -6, you see how fast that initial response is if I run the IPR, but quite blocky at the beginning. Let's set it back to -3 for now. To see the render buckets in the IPR, you need to change the display bucket corners up here to enabled. Now we can see the render buckets. Now you can enable custom bucket size and define IPR bucket size separately from the picture viewer bucket size. Let's try something like 16 pixels for much smaller buckets. Disable custom bucket size for now. If I clear the bitmap in the IPR and run it again, because we have progressive refinement turned on, we get a quick initial render, then the final render starts bucket by bucket. But if we don't want this bucket rendering and we wanted the progressive refinement to continue cleaning the entire render, we need to enable this progressive render option under the render menu in the IPR. In this mode, you probably want to turn off display bucket corners for the IPR, and now we have essentially disabled the bucket rendering in the IPR, and the entire render is being continuously refined. I tend to keep the progressive refinement and progressive render options enabled in most cases. And finally, we have this anamorphic workflow. In the render settings, go to the output section and let's change the pixel aspect ratio from square to 1.42 for PAL widescreen. When an anamorphic workflow is enabled, the IPR window shows the squeezed image, allowing you to work on the original pixel aspect ratio. But if it is disabled, we get the defined pixel aspect ratio. For now, let's set the pixel aspect ratio to 1 and enable anamorphic workflow. You can move your camera around in the IPR with the same viewport shortcuts. You can orbit, pan around, and zoom in and out. There are some useful shortcuts in the IPR which you can access by pressing Alt and W while hovering your mouse pointer in the IPR. And now you can see a full list here. For example, I can start and stop the IPR using the Alt, W, and R. If you right-click on a geometry, you get a contextual menu. You can select the object, append another object to the selection, remove an object from the selection, set an object as the focus object for the camera using this pick focus option. And if you choose this create Arnold material, a new Arnold shader network will be created and assigned to the geometry that you right-clicked on. Okay, in this lesson, we learned about Arnold IPR window. See you in the next video.